So this is just a reminder of what we have done yesterday. So the idea of the pipeline that I presented is basically that you start with a model design. Okay, so you start here with model design. Then you want to calibrate your mathematical model, so you want to estimate your parameter using, for instance, the square approaches. This is where you need data. So that's here. And then once you have a calibrated model, you want to use it to answer the biological question that you have asked. So, for instance, if you want to optimize drug combination, then basically what you need is to design an optimal problem, an optimization problem, and this is basically that. And then once you have something that is a drug combination that is designed by the model, you want to go and see your collaborators, biologists, to validate the solutions of the model. A very quick thing I wanted to mention is that there was a mistake yesterday on one of the slides in the formula here. Instead of the X, there was an F, and this was a mistake. So this is not corrected, but if you took notes yesterday, there was an F, so this is clearly not what was supposed to be again. It's an X. Just change that in your notes. So basically, the loss of the parameter estimation should be related to the variable, the state variables. Okay, X. So maybe anyway, you have this slide, and this is the correct one. So this being said, now let's continue what we started yesterday. So I will go to the SURF, which is the real-world application. So remember that we were talking about the SARC oncogene, which is a gene that is overexpressed in cancer cells. And what we want to do is to design a drug combination that will safely kill cancer cells. It means that they will kill cancer cells, but they will not kill healthy cells. And the way that the cells were defined is basically you have normal, untransformed cells, which are the ones you want to kill, and you have cells transformed to overexpress the SARC oncogene, which stands here for the cancer cells. And remember that we have seen that our collaborator biologists identified BIC as one important protein, because if you go, maybe I'll go directly to this one, if you look at the amount of BIC protein, so that's here, in the normal sense for the transformed cells, what you can see is that the amount is clearly below here, and it's below in transformed cells, in cancer cells, and not in normal cells. Maybe as a reminder, when we have here large intensity, black intensity means that the protein is present. On the opposite, when you have low intensity, means that the protein is less present, or almost absent. So yesterday I described the dynamics of BIC in normal conditions. So the cells are in their petri dish, in their culture medium, without any stress. Now today what I want to do is to go and model the condition when the cells are exposed to a drug, a cytotoxic drug. In that case, that will be staurosporine. So staurosporine is a drug that is used in the clinics to cure, or to try to cure some types of cancer. And here, biologists have used this drug to try to kill the cancer cells in vitro. So let's have a look first at the biology before going to the modeling. So here, what I'm showing are experiments after or during an exposure to the drug for 8 hours. The first panel here, so the first line is just a control, you can ignore that. Second line is again the amount of peak in the presence of the drug in the normal cells. And as you can see, the amount of peak is constant over time. So if you have the columns represent timing, so this is 0 when you put the drug. Time 0 is defined as the time when you put the drug. And then you wait for 2 hours, and you measure the protein, then 4 hours, then 8 hours, and then 6 hours, etc. And as you can see, there is no effect, the drug has no effect on the total quantity. This is something that we have to keep in mind. However, if you go a bit further down in terms of mechanistic details and also in terms of spatial scale, you can observe this. So I'm going to go through that. So here, so this line here shows experiments in cells without any bug, and the second line shows experiments with cells exposed to the drug. Now, first column is labeled so that the green are the big proteins. Then, second column, the red is for the mitochondria, where the mitochondria is. Remember that the mitochondria is an organelle in the cell that is involved in energy balance, energy production. And now, if you look at the third column, this is just superimposing that and that. Okay? So if you superimpose green and red, you are supposed to see orange. So now if you look at the first line, without the dot, you will see that you don't have much orange, meaning that Vic is not necessarily in the mitochondria or close to the mitochondria. On the opposite here, you see much more orange, which means that Vic actually translocates to the mitochondria. Vic is actually attracted by the mitochondria in the presence of the drug. And actually, this is something that is well known. In the presence of stress, the several proteins, including B, but not only B, will actually migrate to the mitochondria. This is the half of the mitochondria, and this is the mitochondrial surface. And what we know is that the cell may trigger apoptosis, so may trigger cell suicide, their own death, by creating pores here at the surface of the mitochondria, which then trigger the release of proteins inside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm that will then induce cell death. So basically there is a fight, there is a battle at the level of the surface of the mitochondria between different types of proteins, which I'm going to explain. And this is what we want to model. So the model we looked at this. I need to describe basically 4 types of proteins. So the one in blue are called bags. So bags will be in different forms, which I'm going to explain in a minute. And those are the ones that create the pores. So the one in green actually so those are called pro-apoptotic proteins. They play in favor of apoptosis. Then on the opposite, you have BCL2. BCL2 is in the model a family of proteins. It's not just one protein that we learn. It's a lot of proteins. And those guys are anti-apoptotic. Okay? And then B and B are pro-apoptotic. So just to remember to have the information here, I will write this. So remember that you have pro-apoptotic, so bags, or B and D, and B, and anti, that is BCL2. So in the model, we stand for different proteins which are written in blue here. BCL1, BCL2, and BCL8. But we don't go in that much detail. Okay, so now let's look at the mathematical model. So the first thing that I would like to describe is the time 0. So at time 0 you put the drug, and in the mathematical model it will have 2 effects. So the first thing is that it will activate Vic. So big is here, at rest, probably far away from the mitochondria. And when the drug is here, big turns into big act. And in terms of biology, it probably means that big relocates to the mitochondria. This is exactly what we just saw. Then there is a second thing that is triggered at time t=0, which is the activation of BID. So BID is one type of cooperative protein, and BID will be truncated into T-BID, and this is the second effect that happens at time t=0. Okay, then you have several things. T-BID will then activate VAX. VAX is in an inactive form at t=0, and then will be activated by T-BID into the first species, which is vaccine. And then vaccine will actually attach together to create balls, and this is what we call vaxolito. And this species is the one that will be related to apoptosis. We will connect here actually the same model that I'm going to in a minute to induce cell death. And then you have the BCL2 family, which will inhibit, as you can see, almost everybody. BCL2 will inhibit big act, TBID, and vaccine. And then the last thing that is interesting, that makes the problem a bit more complex, is that big is actually helping TBID. As you can see here, when TBID is trapped in complexes with BCL2, so when TBID is inhibited, big has the power to release TBID so that it can go and activate VAX. So if I write the reaction for this one, so the other ones, the other reactions are simple, so I'm not going to write them. But so maybe this one is the one that will trick you, or maybe not. So you have basically complexes of TBID and BCL2. So this is basically when TBID is trapped in complex with BCL2, so when it's inactive. Then when a big molecule will come or will be close to this type of complex, it will then take the place of TBID, and then you have free TBID plus the complex of big and BCL2. So as you can see, big is consumed by this reaction. So let's look at the equations. So we derive the equations using the law of protection, as discussed today. So in the black square, you have the equations for big, and in the red, you have the ones for TBID. So very quickly, big is activated at time t=0 into big act, so with the first order equation like this. Then big activated, so receive the matter here. Then it's directly inactivated, it's directly inactivated by BCL2. So this is this arrow here. And then you have the third reaction, the one I just talked about, the CAD3, where big actually take the place of TBID in complexity. Okay. I'm not going through all the equations, so basically that's the main idea. BID is also activated into TBID at time t=0. Then you have one term for equation. Now for VAX and BCL2, these are the equations. So maybe I can comment a bit more about VAX. So the activation of VAX follows the Michaelis-Menten term, so the second one, the open here. So, and in this case, we have assumed that TBID acts as an enzyme. As you can see here, TBID is here at the place of E, and then you have Michaelis-Menten term, great. And then you can also have a closing of VAX link, so the second species here. The spontaneous reversion, spontaneous way back towards the VAX activity. So then VAX link will actually associate associates, two Bax molecule, Bax-link molecule associates to create a Bax oligo. And these are those terms here, the KRAS1. But you can also have Bax-link and Bax oligo. It will be that will form two Bax oligo. So basically, so you have at least two ways to activate or to create Bax oligo. Either you create or you associate two Bax-link. And you get two Bax oligo. Or you can also associate one Bax-link plus one Bax oligo. That's correct. No, I don't think there is two. Yeah, actually, there is no two as well. So the idea is to actually design the fact that basically when you have two Bax-link, you will get a single, that would be a Bax oligo. It's like before, that will create a hole in the mitochondria. Surface, at the mitochondria surface. That would be free and things can then go out. Okay, so now this is at the intracellular level. So now, as I was saying, we connected this intracellular model to a cellular model. So now the equation here is for a variable n, which is the number of cells, or the percentage of cells that survive, which are alive basically at time t. And so here we assume that the cells do not divide, so the cells cannot grow basically, but they can only die. And they will die with a rate that depends on Bax oligo in a type of function which we call Hill function, which is more or less the same thing as the Emax function I showed you yesterday. And so this function will have three parameters. And the idea is that we want several things for it. I mean, there are several reasons why I'm showing this check. So the first thing is that we know that for small values of Bax oligo, nothing is happening. And I'm going to draw this rate. So with respect to Bax oligo, the rate will have an S shape, something like this. So the parameter A will tell you the stiffness of the curve. So again, if I had A that would be lower, I would have something stiffer, less stiff, sorry, like something like this. But here in that case, N was 24. So we have something which is more like a black curve. So I'm going to click with the black curve. Okay. So from biology, what we know is that for small values of Bax, nothing is happening. There is no death. So the cells are not dying. So this is exactly what we have here with this S shape. Okay. The death rate here is close to 0. Then for some threshold values, the death rate will actually go more or less closer to the maximum value, meaning that the cell will actually die for some when Bax oligo go some threshold. And also what we wanted is bounded profile. We didn't want the death rate to go to infinity when Bax oligo goes to infinity. So that's another positive thing about this type of rates. Okay, so with that we have the whole system. And something else that we actually assume to simplify a bit the problem is that basically all families will have constant total amount, total consumption. So for the big, this is something that we have seen in the experiments. Remember that we have seen that the total amount stays constant over time in the presence of the bag. Meaning that basically if I take all my species that includes big in my model, this should be constant. So for instance, big can be big inactive, big active, or big in contact with BCL2. And you do the same for bags, BCL2, and be the total quantity. So meaning that basically now those four conservation laws can help you compute the form of the mathematical variables, and you just need out of the 11 that are in the mathematical model, and actually you just need to compute the other 7 from the system of Odin. Very briefly, we computed the steady states, which were not very interesting in that case because they were probably not realistic. So you have 3 types of steady state. Maybe we'll start with steady state 2 and 3, so this type so you have two types here, 2 and 3. So as you can see, back Soligo, here's back Soligo. So here you have so basically, Bax-Soligo is going either as Bax-Total is going either as Bax-Soligo or as Bax-BCL2, and this is something that's not realistic because we know that when the cell dies, there is still plenty of Bax inactive. So basically, here what we would like is some Bax some Bax inactive that will be non-zero, and this is not what we get in steady state 2 and 3. So this is why we think 2 and 3 are probably not realistic, or at least we don't go up to there in time. Something has happened before we reach the state in biology. And then so we are left with this state number 1, which is when you have some quantities of Bax which is activated. And here it is not really informative for our problem, because basically the quantity of Bax-Soligo that will be activated, or the Bax-Soligo that will be created, will define the cell rate, so the cell death rate. Hence, we are more interested in constant dynamics before reaching the steady state. So this is what we are going to do now. We are not going to steady state. Okay, so this is it for model design. So now we have a mathematical model. We have talked also with our colleagues, biologists, that perform some specific experiments, and we have a bit more which I'm going to show. And now, this is the hard part, which is parameter estimation. And clearly this is the longest part, as I was mentioning yesterday. So let's do a bit into the data and then do the parameter estimation. So the first thing that we wanted to address was the total quantity, which are in the conservation loop. So what we have done is we have been through the experimental data, so this is there. So the way you can read that is one line is one protein. So remember that we have learned some protein together. For instance, if I take BCL2, so my BCL2 variable stands for the sum of this protein BCL2, this protein BCLXL, and this protein MCL1. So that one line equals one protein. Be careful because you cannot compare one line with the other. The intensities are different for protein. Okay. So don't compare one line with the other. You can just compare a line and different columns of the line. In terms of columns, so control will be the healthy cells and SAP will be the cancer cells. And here you have different fractions of the cells. So mitochondria will be for the mitochondria. And basically you can use this to infer the ratios between normal and cancer. So this is the only thing you can get, because from here you cannot get numbers. It's not quantitative, it's something that we call semi-quantitative. in the way that we can actually get ratios from one condition to another, but you cannot get quantities. So this is this column here of the table. From this data, we actually get the ratios. So the point O2, I actually already talked about it, but you can do the same for VAX, for instance. And this is interesting because remember that VAX is a coapoptotic protein. Okay? It's a protein that we induce, that we kept inducing cell death. And now look at that. There is a twofold ratio in favor of the cancer cells, meaning that the cancer cells actually express more coapoptotic protein. And this is something that is not expected at all, because the cancer cells, by definition, they don't want to die and they want to be protected. But in this particular case, probably things are blocked above any VAX activation, so they don't really care about having plenty of VAX in their intracellular space. And this is what the biology says, that basically you have twice more VAX molecule in the cancer cells. Okay, you do the same for the other species, and then you get your ratio. So now what we have done is we have inferred the quantitative value for the total concentration in the cancer cells from the literature. So we have taken information from the literature. So for instance, we have set VAX to 100 nanomolar in the cancer cells. And because we know the ratio, then we will just deduce the quantities in the noise. Okay? So this is just a very small, simple trick for getting the total concentration. So now that we have the total concentration, we need to estimate the kinetics parameter. So the model has 13 kinetics parameters, which is quite a lot to estimate. So for 3 of them, it was possible to estimate them one by one, so which is of course the most precise thing we can do. So for instance, for the activation of B, we were able to use here the timeline of this experiment to estimate the single parameter CAC. On the opposite, for the 10 remaining parameters, we have only few data. So let's be honest, this is the case where we are overestimating, we are telling an overestimation, an overfitting problem. We don't have a single parameter set that is optimal for data. We have actually plenty of different parameters. But this is so this is called maybe you have heard of the word identifiability, and so the synonym of that is that basically the parameters are not practically identifiable. So the data that is available do not allow to identify your parameters. But this being said, this is not because your model contains parameters which are not identifiable, but the model is completely useless. And this is one example why you don't need to have an exact estimation of all your parameters to actually answer your question. Okay, so here, in terms of fitting, so we did a fitting, so remember that there is not a unique optimum, but we did an optimization. And so we fitted this type of data. So this is the percentage of cell dying, apoptotic cells, in different conditions. So either when the cells are exposed to staurosporine alone, and the blue bar will be the normal cells, and the orange will be the cancer. So as you can see, this is exactly what we saw yesterday. So the normal cells are very sensitive to the bulb, and the orange cells are not sensitive. And then the cells to staurosporine and erbiumycin, which is an inhibitor of SARC. So the next question is how do you model this in your optimization problem? And the way we have decided to model this is to decrease the BSARC value. And maybe I'll have to go back to the... No, maybe I will not go back to the question. I guess you remember the question from yesterday. So, but this parameter was actually decreased by, I think, 90%, so very large amount. And then basically once you change this value of parameter, you do that at the beginning of your simulation, and you run your model with this new parameter value, and you get those new simulations. So maybe I forgot to say that here the dots or the squares are the experimental data, and the bars are the predictions of the model. And as you can see, So the predictions and the data agrees very much. But here this is easy because we have plenty of parameters. We have basically too many degrees of freedom, and we can easily fit the data. And the last thing I wanted to say is that, of course, if you reverse transformation, basically if you put a SRC inhibitor, you get the cell death back in the cancer cells. But this is not an acceptable solution because you also get cell death here in the normal cells. So basically, this is a bit better because in terms of if I were a patient and if I get those drugs, I would have efficacy on my tumor, but I would also have toxicities, which is not acceptable. So we need to continue the work. Okay, so up to here, we basically have an estimation for all parameters. So I have listed here the 13 parameters of the model, and here those are the values we decided to take, which were the optimal value taken from the CMIS optimization. Maybe something I wanted to stress was the high range, as you can see. Here there is a higher range for this particular reaction, which is the one I detailed, which is the one where when BIC actually release the TEBID from the BCL2 inhibition. And as you can see, this seems to be a very active reaction that is very important, and which also explains why just changing the level of BIC between normal and cancer cells actually have a large effect on the system. Okay, so now that we have the model with the parameters, we can just run it and look at the simulation. So this is what we have done. So here, on the x-axis you have time in minutes, and on the y-axis you have cell variables. And the blue color is for the normal cells, and the orange color are for the cancer cells. It's for the cancer cells. So as you can see, so maybe if I start from the beginning. So here you have BIC, so it starts at two different levels. Remember that BIC is not really expressed in the cancer cell. And then BIC is activated at time t equals 0. So BIC will transform into BIC act, so this is here. And as you can see, I mean, as expected, BIC act amount is way higher in normal cells as compared to cancer cells. So then you have VAX inact here, that will be slightly inactivated, but as you can see, the levels of activation are not really, I mean, the proportion of cells which are proteins which are activated is not very large. And then the VAX inact will be able to rise of VAX link first, as you can see. So if you go like this, you have the first here VAX link, and then later on you will have VAX oligo. And here, this is the threshold value of the Hill function in the equation about n being the number of cells. And as you can see, basically, for the normal cells, the VAX oligo amount will go over the threshold, and we will have some cell death. On the opposite, for the cancer cells, you are below the threshold, and you have almost no death. So this is nice because as you can see, we can use the model for a mechanistic explanation of why there is a resistance. Okay, so we have the model, we have P, it's calibrated. And now let's move to the next step, which is optimization, the drug combination optimization. So before going to the optimization itself, we had a closer look to one particular drug combination, which is the combination of sporosporin and BCL2 inhibition. So remember, BCL2 are the anti-apoptotic proteins, so it could be a good idea to actually inhibit the anti-apoptotic proteins to try to trigger apoptosis. And this is what is the model, well, those are the simulations, so the curves here are the simulations. Again, the supers are the experimental data, there are 4 of them. And so we are looking at the decrease in BCL2 total quantity. So this is more or less the dose. You can see this as the dose of the BCL2 inhibitor, which by the way is because of the nice name, which is ABT7300, that's the name of the BCL2 inhibitor. And so here on the x-axis you can see this as the dose. And on the y-axis you look at we are looking at the percentage of apoptotic cells at the end of the 8-hour exposure of autoexposure. And as you can see, basically, well, if you go to some, after some time, after some, if you increase the dose, indeed you will get some deaths in the cancer cells, which are again in orange. So this is the deaths in the cancer cells. But as for the staurosporine plus carbimazine combination, we also get actually quite a large amount of cell deaths in the normal cells. So basically the intuitive drug combination, which consists of putting staurosporine plus BCL2 inhibitors, is not working here. So this is again another argument to say that we really need some optimization here to really find the optimal drug combinations. Okay, so let's go to optimization. So remember yesterday, what I presented is that the first thing you need to do is define an objective. So here we are going to be very optimistic, let's say. So we want the maximum efficacy without almost no toxicity. So we want maximum cell death in cancer cells, with deaths in the healthy cells being less than 1% of the population. So this is what is written here. So that's the objective. Now, so what are we going to look at in terms of coefficients to be optimized? So we are looking at combinations composed of staurosporine, given for 8 hours, plus molecules or drugs which either target STAR, so inhibitors of STAR, or which target proteins of the other families, so BAX, BCL2, TB, and D. And we have investigated possibilities to push them up or down. Okay, so we have two possibilities here. And the way we do that is simply by modifying the corresponding initial conditions or parameters. So for STAR it will be the BSAR parameter, but for the rest it's going to be the BAX or big dot, and these quantities will be modified from T equals 0. And to make sure that the drug combination that is identified is actually clinically relevant, we have set a maximum number of drugs to 3, because it sounds a bit unrealistic to actually administer more than 3 drugs to the patients. So you put this in your CMRS optimization, and this is what you get. So I'm going directly to the results. So the optimal drug combination is, as predicted by the optimization problem, is to give staurosporine in combination with a second agent that will actually downregulate BAX, and I will explain in a minute, plus a third agent that will either downregulate BCL2, upregulate it, or inhibit STAR. So yeah, basically you have several optimal strategies, but the common thing is the second agent that will actually reduce BAX. And why? Because remember that we have seen that BAX is overexpressed or is more expressed in the cancer cells. Okay, so at the initial time, BAX plus is about this in the normal cells, and about that in the cancer cells. And here we are assuming that the normal and cancer cells see the same drug, the same amount of drug, because this is a typical physiological situation, right? When you take a drug, then the drug will go either to the healthy or to the cancer cells in the same way. And then what we have said is that when you give some drug, you will lower down the quantity of drugs of the same amount, meaning that basically you can lower for the normal cells, the DAX will go to 0, and for the cancer cells, it will go to some non-zero values. And basically now, if you put the DAX, so the green will give you the DAX inhibitor. And basically now, the normal cells do not have DAX anymore. And what do you think will happen if we don't have DAX? Can we still die? Can the cells still die? No. As you can see, basically, if you go into your model, if you put DAX start equals 0, you will never be able to have a DAX oligo that will go all those switches. And this is the trick that was identified by the mathematical model and the possibility. And basically, if you do that, so if you put the DAX inhibitor such that DAX total is equal to 0 in the normal cells, then basically those cells are sheltered from anything. So you can put more or less everything you want, and then you can then kill the cancer cells. And this is what is shown here. So those are the simulations. Now with one of the optimal solutions, which is when you put some staurosporine, then a DAX inhibitor, and a SARC inhibitor. And what you can see is that basically now the DAX inact will, the DAX inact is at 0 for the healthy cells, blue line, and it's non-zero for the cancer cells. So DAX link is of course non-zero than the cancer cells, and DAX link will actually go above the threshold, which sorry, the threshold is actually here. So it's really, you can barely see, the threshold is actually really low. And as you can see, the cancer cells are dying while the healthy cells are not dying. Well, this is what the model predicts. So what do we want to do next? Validation, right? We want to go to experiments and then discuss with our colleagues, biologists, and see, well, this is what I suggest. Is it working in the real life? Yes or no? So this is what we have done. So that is experimental validation. And those are the results. So, again, we are looking at the percentage of cells which are undergoing apoptosis, so cell death. Those bars here will be for staurosporine alone. Those bars here will be for staurosporine and BCL2 inhibitor. This one, staurosporine and SARC inhibitor. And then the white, so the white-ish bars, so the first three are for the normal cells. The black-ish bars are for the cancer cells. Okay. Now, these bars, so number 2 and 3, are with a type of DAX inhibition. So this is not really a drug antibody inhibitor, so basically there is an inhibition of DAX, okay, in bars 2 and 3 here, that you can see for instance here and here and here. And in bars 5 and 6, there is also a DAX inhibitor, okay? So now let's have a look at the data. So basically, if you just give staurosporine, you will have some deaths in the normal cells without the DAX inhibitor. But then, if you inhibit DAX, just doing that, will make the healthy cells, the normal cells resistant. So this is the first thing that we wanted, so that's good. Yeah. So at the moment, just doing that, we know that inhibiting DAX can actually shatter the healthy cells. Now, if I go maybe to that one first, as you can see, if on top of staurosporine and DAX inhibition, now you inhibit SARC, you will get this quantity of cell death for the cancer cells, meaning that almost all cancer cells will actually die. And this is clearly what we want. And on the opposite, here for this condition, so the one with DAX inhibition, there is almost no toxicity. Okay, here the bars for the healthy cells are close to 0. On the opposite, the bars for the cancer cells are close to 100%. And this is exactly what we wanted. Okay, we wanted maximum efficacy, so black bars as high as possible, with no toxicity, white bars as low as possible. And this is what we got. So basically, now we can just conclude that the drug combination is validated. And we do have a drug combination that safely eradicates cancer cells. Okay, so this is the conclusion for this first part. So what have we done? So first of all, we have designed a mathematical model that focuses on the mitochondrial pathway of apoptosis. We have performed a careful parameter identification. So as you have seen, we have been as much as possible step by step, parameter by parameter, incorporating all possible data, which in this case was not sufficient for identifying all parameters, but still allow for the approach to be performed. We concluded that the obvious strategies, that the most simple strategies, drug combinations were not working in this particular case, and the optimization procedure helped us identify a non-intuitive drug combination that was then validated in experiments. So basically, this is what we call a proof of concept that quantitative system pharmacology can really help identifying complicated, complex drug combinations for different cancers or cancer types or patients. Okay, so I will finish this first part here. Do you have questions about this? Yes?
Could I have a question?
Sure.
Could you know the overall stage of this modeling? How long we get that? Is it 1, 2?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really good question because basically the longest part is parameter estimation. So model design will take you just the time to go and see your biologists, your colleagues, and discuss a few months, I would say, like 2 to 3 months. If you have a PhD student working on that full time. But then parameter estimation. So you need first to identify the data that you have, and it takes a long time, because for instance you need to go to the literature and search for data. Once you have the data, you need to make sure that you have the real numbers, because sometimes you only get the bars or the curves, and you need to estimate this from a picture. And then you need to run the estimation, and sometimes the estimation actually provides you with flat fees. The model does not fit. So then you enter in a loop where you want to update your mathematical model, then fit again your data, then update again if you have a bad fit, and so on. And this can be a year to get this, like a full year. And then once you have that, optimization is super short, because it's just, in terms of running time, the optimization itself is 15 minutes. So basically in a month, you can actually have the optimal combination. And then you go to your colleague and the biology, of course, that takes more time, setting up a biological experiment. But this one, for instance, I think it was more like 6 months to get the validation experiment. That's a really good question, because really the key is to remember that parameter estimation is really taking a lot of time. Yes? You want to use the microphone so that everyone just
I'm just curious if you or your team has already mentioned on the cost effectiveness aspect of these possible combinations of drugs. You mentioned that there could be a possible combination of drug between these kinds of drugs. So have you already ventured on the cost effectiveness aspect of the deployment of these drugs after the laboratory?
So the question is, have you worked on the cost effectiveness of the drug combination? But then I'm not sure I understand what you mean by cost effectiveness. What do you mean?
So for instance, sometimes you know that these drugs work in the laboratory setting. Sometimes creating these drugs, deploying these drugs on an active field costs. And so you consider.
Okay, so you mean in the real life to produce the actual chemicals. Okay, so this is very interesting, but for this particular in vitro setting, we didn't really care about this because, as you can see, well, maybe I briefly mentioned that, but one of the strategies of tax inhibition is not even a drug. It's something that we do in vitro, just targeting one particular protein. Because it's probably not completely realistic to have this type of drug. So this is why we are going to go through that. On the opposite, for instance, storage is a drug that is widely used in the clinics. And in terms of cost effectiveness, as you said, I think it's really good because it has been created a long time ago and it has been used in many patients. But I think in oncology, in cancer research, this argument on cost effectiveness is not really an argument because we are really lacking efficient strategies. So people are ready to pay the price for the drugs, and this is why anti-cancer drugs are among the most expensive ones. If you think about the immunotherapies like immune checkpoint inhibitors, they are very, very expensive. And this is due to what you said, like synthesizing the antibodies is actually very, very expensive.
No, the reason why I asked that is perhaps cost effective to many countries for those countries that they have mentioned. Is it like cost effective to be distributed? So that's why I'm asking if you have a residential, if you have one of these potential publishing drugs, how many lives would have to be, or they come test, like other countries would have thresholds. Perhaps in like countries you have higher budget.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's interesting because even in this example, as you have seen, we have different optimal strategies. So we can then optimize again at the term for the cost of the that is one way to do that. Yes, question.
Do you have any criteria for the reliability and certified predict the experiment data? The criteria to tell that your model is stratified to equal to predict the experimental data.
Okay, so the question is which criteria do we use to actually validate the fact that the model is representing the reality, representing the real world data. So there are several ways to do that, but the most straightforward way is just to look at your fit during your parameter estimation. So you can do it either graphically. Okay, this is for instance what I showed here. Graphically, you can see that the bars are at the same level as the data. The data are the points here. I don't know if you can see those 3 points. So I do admit that this is not a lot of data, but here we have 3 points. And the bars are the model prediction, the model estimation. And as you can see here, there is a good fit. So this is the first partial validation of your mathematical model. This is what you want to do first. Reproduce the data you have used for parameter estimation. Then the second step is what you want to do when you can is to actually use an independent set of data that you have not used for parameter estimation to validate your mathematical model. So in that case here, we didn't have enough data to do that. But for instance, it could be a different drug exposure, or a different function, or a different drug combination. And then you just take that and your data, and now you have a new simulation in this particular condition with the parameters that were estimated with the first set of data, and you want to compare whether or not your model prediction actually reproduce your new set of data that you want to use for validation. So this is the second step, validation. How do we get the data? Yes, yeah, exactly. So the question is how do we get the data for parameter estimation? And yes, the answer is always in the literature. So it's either you go in the literature and search specific values, for instance, for the total concentration of the proteins. Some of them are set to 1 nanomolar because this was measured in some experiments. And then you can go to other types of experiments. Here I have showed, for instance, the translocation of P from the cytoplasm to the mitochondria, the images that I showed here. And so this is one type of data that you can actually extract the quantity of bit that relocates to the mitochondria here by estimating the orange color. And this is how you get your parameters. Okay. Okay. So the question is how do you know the number of data that you need? So for this, I mean, in most of the cases you don't have enough, let's be honest. So that's the idea. So what you want to make sure is, or what you want to quantify is which parameters are affected by the fact that you have a lack of data. And this is called parameter identifiability. This is something I haven't talked about now. I will talk a bit about this later in the lectures. And this is where you want to know whether or not your parameter can be estimated with a reasonable standard deviation. So one way to do that is just to look at your distribution of parameters at the end, so the possible parameters that fit your data. And basically, all your parameters in your search interval, for instance, if you search your parameter from 0 to 1, and if all values will actually fit your data, it means that your parameter is not identifiable at all, because it means that your cost function do not depend on this parameter. So this is called identifiability, but it's a whole field. I mean, it's a bit difficult to explain in one sentence, but we can discuss more if you want. More questions on this part? Okay, if not, I will answer. If not, I will continue with the second part, if that's okay? Yeah? Okay. Cool. Okay, so let's go to the second part of the lecture. So I will change the topic a bit, but still this is related. No, I'm not sorry. Okay, so that's the second part of the lectures, out of the three, there will be three parts. So we want to go a bit closer to the clinics, okay? What I showed for the real world application was in vitro in cells, and now we want to study a specific case, so which are brain tumors. And we are going to focus on one cancer drug, which is called temozolomide, okay, here. So there are several types of brain tumors, and the most frequent in adults is the glioblastoma. So it's a really aggressive tumor, and it's actually associated with a dismal prognosis of about 18 months survival from the diagnosis. Okay, if you enter the doctor office and he unfortunately tells you that you have glioblastoma, the median overall survival is 18 months. So that's really pretty short. In terms of treatment, current treatment, so the patient would actually go and have surgery to remove the tumor, but it's of course very difficult to remove all cancer cells. It's actually almost impossible. Then they will go for radiation, and then they will have temozolomide as a chemotherapy for several months, 5 times a week. And this standard of care was actually validated in 1999. So it's like 24 years or 25 years ago. And basically we are still looking for new therapies and effective therapies for glioblastoma. This is the current challenge, and this is a difficult one. And why is it difficult? For several reasons. So it's a complex disease because, first of all, the cancer cells are not homogeneous. Okay, it's an heterogeneous tumor, where you have different cancer cell populations with different behaviors, different drug sensitivity. That's one thing. And the tumor is plastic, so meaning that it will change over time. So plasticity is the ability to change or to adapt to the drug here. We are going to talk about the drug. So basically, when we give the temozolomide to the tumor, the tumor will adapt and become resistant to the drug. And there is a last problem, which is a problem in terms of pharmacokinetics, because in the brain, as you may know, not all chemicals in your blood will be able to enter the brain, and this is on purpose. This is to protect the brain. And so at the level of the blood vessels in the brain, you have what is called blood-brain barrier, BBB, blood-brain barrier, that will prevent the chemicals from going from the blood to the brain cells. And this applies to most of the drugs. So basically if you administer most of the drugs, most of the cancer drugs that actually work for other cancer types to a patient that has a brain tumor, it will probably not work because the drug will not even reach the tumor because it will be blocked by the brain barrier. Okay, so that's where we stand, and the aim of this part of lectures is to investigate the molecular mechanisms of temozolomide PK/PD, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, and try to design drug combinations that could circumvent this resistance. And of course, the way we are going to do that is to use quantitative systems pharmacology. So I will show you different things in this part of the lectures. First of all, I will start with the PK of the drug, which is a bit complex, not much of it. And then, so I will use differential equations to study that. And then I will actually introduce another type of modeling, which is hybrid modeling, that will use both PDEs, spatial PDEs, and ODEs to investigate the PK, adding the space variable in the equation. The third part will be about the pharmacodynamics, so adding the pharmacodynamics to pharmacokinetics, and showing how we can combine QSP and machine learning to actually answer several questions, which I'm going to give down in part 3. And in part 4, the idea will be to go, so 1, 2, 3 will be at the level of the cells. Again, we are going to stay in vitro, we are going to stay in cell cultures, or in tumors, let's say, no patients. And the idea of part 4 is to go towards the clinics and to show you how we can design multi-scale approaches to predict the pharmacokinetics of drugs in patients from data available in vitro and animal studies. So it's called, it has different names, but it can be called like multi-scale modeling, or we can basically scale from animals to patients. So I think for today I will only do number 1, and then we will continue tomorrow for the rest. Okay, so the idea now is to study the pharmacokinetics of temozolomide and start modeling it so that it can then be used for information with the PD model to ultimately design drug combinations. Okay, so we will start the study first in buffer solutions, meaning that there is no cell. You just take your drug and put it in a solution. What is a buffer solution? Is a solution that has a constant pH. Okay? Whatever you do with the solution, it will stay, the pH will remain the same. So I'm familiar with pH. So pH is whether a solution is basic or acid. It goes from 0 to 40, maybe over this. So the pH scale, it goes from 0 to 14. So the physiological ones are around 7. And basically, in your normal tissues, you will not go below 6 or maybe 5.8 maybe. And you will not go above 8 point something or maybe 9. So basically, that would be the physiological range. So here you have the acid solutions and close to 14 you have the basic solutions. Okay. Okay, so this is the pharmacokinetics of temozolomide. Temozolomide is the first species which is denoted here, TMZ. So it is first activated into MTIC in a spontaneous manner with a rate KT. And then MTIC is spontaneously substituted into AIC, which is completely inactive, so we don't really care about this AIC. And a methyl cation, that is the active species. That's the one which is going to create a DNA damage, hence tablets. So this is the one we are really interested in, so the cation here. In terms of equations, as you can see, you can just write your equations using the law of mass action, and this is actually quite simple here. You have first order equations, so for instance, temozolomide can only disappear into MTIC, and this is the first equation here, and then you go on. So here the small complexity is that maybe you have noticed here that KT, I have written KT in terms of pH. So KT is actually a function of the pH. So those are the experimental data sets. So here we are looking at, on the x-axis you have the pH, and on the y-axis you have actually the two parameters, KT and Km, these two parameters. And as you can see, what the data tells you is that you have a relationship which is close to an exponential between the pH and the parameter values. So this is what we have modeled. We have modeled KT, so the parameter KT, as an exponential. So now, instead of having only one parameter, you actually have two parameters. So you have KT0 and lambda t. So meaning that basically your system doesn't have two parameters, but actually have four parameters. Okay? And what we want to estimate now, knowing the pH, because we know the pH, we can measure that. Knowing the pH, we want to estimate KT0 and lambda t, and KM0 and lambda m. This is what we want to estimate. Okay? So four parameters. Okay, so what do we want to do next? What do you think? Model design, after model design we go to parameter estimation. Yeah. So we were very fortunate to actually get the data. So this is where those are, so the dots are the data and the lines are the best fit of the model. So let me introduce the data first. So we have four different subplots for four different values of the buffer solution. Remember, we are here in a solution, and we set the pH to whatever we want. So here we have set the solution to either pH equal 1, pH equal 6.8, 9.1, or 13. Then we are looking for each subplot. The x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is either temozolomide, MTIC, or AIC. Okay, it's different colors. And so temozolomide is the first species, the one that you put in the solution. MTIC second species, AIC last, and inactive species. So as you can see, you have different kinetics of activation for different pH. So if you start with a very acid pH, the temozolomide will stay as temozolomide and will never be activated. On the opposite, if you increase a bit the pH, temozolomide will start to be activated here that's a red curve, and then you actually don't even see MTIC because the second reaction goes very fast at this pH, and then you have here the AIC that will actually appear. If you increase a bit more the pH, so now you are in an intermediate situation where you can see all the reactions. So you can see temozolomide going down, this is the first reaction occurring, then MTIC going up, green curve, and then going down because actually MTIC is transformed into AIC, blue curve. Okay? And basically if you increase a bit the pH, you decrease the rate of the second reaction, and this is why you can see MTIC. And then if you increase again the pH, to 13, you cannot even see temozolomide because both reactions occur very rapidly, and basically the drug is activated almost instantaneously. So we have used the data point that you have seen, that you currently see, so this type of points here. We have run the mathematical model for 4 different simulations with 4 different values of the pH. And then we put everything in the cost function. We optimized that using, here it was, I think it was not the same as pattern-based minimization, because this is a quite simple optimization problem. And those are the values that we get for the estimation of the parameters. Yeah, so we are at the level of the best buffer solution. We have this parameter, and now we are ready to scale to the cells. Okay, so we go from buffer solutions to cells. So let's go to the cells. That's the second step. So this is the mathematical model we have designed for the pharmacokinetics of temozolomide in the cells. So now we do have cells. So you have 2 compartments. So you have an extracellular compartment here, and an intracellular compartment here, and here this is the cell membrane, okay? And as you can see, part of the model was actually inferred from the first step in the buffer solutions. If you look carefully to the model, this part here and this part here is exactly the same as this one that we designed for the buffer solution. And basically what is interesting is that this part is designed and also estimated, okay? All the 4 parameters, we already have the values, and we know we can trust them because we have used experimental data, and in that case they were enough, enough data to actually make the estimate of the parameters. So when you start your cell study at this point, you start actually with a submodel here that is fully estimated, and a submodel here that is fully estimated. So what is left is what? 2 things. So the transport between those parameters, transport of temozolomide and of AIC. So you can actually assume that MTIC is not able to cross the cell membrane. So this is data from literature. And then the second thing is that you do have an action now of the drug on the DNA. So this is called DNA adduct, and it's a type of DNA damage. And this is basically what will trigger cell death. So if you write the equations, I think that should be a little small. So if you write the equations, you can get this. So now it's a combination of flow of perfection and the first flow, with taking care of the volumes, because then we may want to actually scale this model. So we have put the volumes, V out and V in are the volumes for the extracellular and intracellular compartment. I'm not going through all this, but I will look at the slides. Okay, so now in terms of pH, because remember pH is important. So for the pH in the extracellular compartment, it's easy to measure, so we have it. On the opposite, the pH in the intracellular compartment, we don't have it, and it's not easy to measure. So we have been to the literature, and we have seen that there is a simple relationship that we can derive, which is that basically they are almost equal. We say that the pH in the intracellular compartment is equal to the pH in the extracellular compartment minus 0.01. That's what they are almost equal. Okay, so we do have a model and it is designed. So again, let's go to parameter estimation. So here we are also very happy because we have actually the data. So this is cell culture data. This is in U87 cells, which are glioblastoma cells from human patients that can grow in vitro. And here I'm showing the data. So the first column is for extracellular amount, and second column is for intracellular amount. First line is temozolomide, second MTIC, and third is AIC over time. And as you can see, we have a really good fit of the model to the data. So we are actually really happy. And from there, we were able to estimate so PT and PT2 here, and PA and PA2 there. Okay, so and the last thing I would like to say for today is that we have used the mathematical model again to try to do some optimization. So it's a bit like the apoptosis approach. We have designed two subpopulations. Okay, one is normal, one is cancer. So how do we define those populations? We actually define the populations by the way they regulate their intracellular pH. So maybe if I just go back one slide or two. So this relationship will be different for normal and cancer cells. And why have we chosen to do that? It's because we have been to the literature and we have collected all possible data that we found between extracellular pH here, that's also pH out, and intracellular pH here. So for any type, so when you have a change in the shape of the pictogram, it means that it's a different cell type. And anything in red will be cancer cells from the literature, and anything in blue, which is light, as you can see, as we only have one point, but we also have an indication about the slope here. That would be the healthy situation. And as you can see, you do have a change. You have a modification of the intracellular pH regulation in the cancer cell. And this is something that is well known. This is not something that we have discovered. So basically, if you go here, so if you go in the acidic part here, if you imagine this line, I have not even drawn it because the cells would die, the normal cells would die around here because the cell cannot survive with a pH that is below 60. On the opposite, if you look at the cancer cells, if you expose them to extracellular pH around 6, they are still able to survive. Why? Because they are able to regulate their intracellular pH to have a value above 6. Okay? So now, as you can see, the intracellular value is actually close to 7. And this is something that the normal cells cannot do. Okay, so let's put this in the mathematical model. So everything else in the model is the same for normal and cancer. And we just put this regulation, this intracellular pH regulation, different for normal and cancer. And we run the model. So we have run the mathematical model for different pH values, which are indicated here. So those are the different colors. And we are looking at the time dynamics of extracellular temozolomide. Here we are looking at the DNA adducts, so the DNA damage related to the cell death in tumor and in normal cells. And as you can see, a bit surprisingly, to be honest, the normal cells here would have some DNA damage which can go up to that level. On the opposite, the tumor cells will have DNA damage that will be much higher for pH which are in the red or orange zone, which is for acidic pH. So basically, you will have more DNA damage, so eventually more cell death in cancer cells due to temozolomide administration when you have a pH which is acidic. And this is something that is just driven by the pharmacokinetics of temozolomide. And if you look at that in terms of surface, where you have the extracellular pH here, so I have just put the physiological range from 6 to 9. And here you have the exposure, the time exposure of temozolomide. And on the z-axis, here you have the DNA adduct amount, so DNA damage. What you can see is that overall, the tumor will have more DNA damage as compared to the healthy cells. And if you just compute the difference between the tumor and the normal, you get this surface. And as you can see, you do have an optimal, so here, in the red, you do have an optimal where you have an optimal pH here, and of course an optimal exposure time, which is long, or the longest, for maximizing the difference between tumor and healthy. And this is what you want to do, right? You want to maximize the difference between the effect on cancer and on healthy. So overall, what does it mean? It means that we could actually act on the pH to improve the efficacy of temozolomide in cancer cells without harming healthy cells. And this would be the conclusion for this part and for today, I think. Yeah. So here, in this first part, what we have done is we have designed mathematical models based on ordinary differential equations to characterize the pharmacokinetics of temozolomide, first in buffer solution, and then in cancer cells cultured in vitro. And then, as you can see, we have used a multi-scale model, multi-scale approach, in the sense that we have used the model that was designed in the buffer solution to then design a model that is more complete or that is more appropriate for the subculture. And then we have used this very simple mathematical model to try to identify strategies that will actually help for the therapeutic optimization. And in particular, we have found that modifying pH and actually having extracellular pH close to acidic values will give an advantage to the normal cells, which will not be sensitive to temozolomide, whereas the cancer cells will actually probably die or die more from temozolomide exposure. So that's it for today, and tomorrow we'll start the hydrogen model at the end of the day. Thank you.
Is there any more questions?